If you like this video, make sure to subscribe to Downfall Network for more cool content. What's up, everyone? Thralls here once again. I am Necrotic Nick, and I have an album review for you. Another one that came out on the 30th of October was the newest offering from Insidious Disease. I decided to kind of take this one solo because this was just kind of an interesting one that popped up, because this is kind of a side project supergroup, but this is also their first album in 10 years. This band formed in 2004 in Oslo, Norway, and is pretty much helmed by a lot of people from a lot of different bands, or formerly of different bands. I imagine there are a lot of session musicians in here as well. But namely, you have Silenaz, or Silenaz, I'm not entirely sure how you pronounce that name, but he is one of the most notable guys from Dimmu Borgir. And you also have Gru, who used to front Morgoth way back. On bass, you also have Shane Embry, of course, from Napalm Death, and then a litany of other projects like Venomous Concept and Lockup. He's been a go-to guy for a lot of session work along the way, too. He's even done time in Anal Nothrak and even appeared as their live bassist for a while. The second guitarist, Cyrus, is from Suspiria. I don't know very much about him, or really very much about Suspiria. I definitely know that it's a band that exists, and apparently one I have to listen to. And then you have Tony Loreno. I think that's how you pronounce his last name, or Loriano. I'm pretty sure it's Loreno, but I'm probably butchering it. I butcher a lot of names. Anyway, this guy has played in a lot of notable bands, namely Nile, Angel Corpse, and Malevolent Creation, and pretty solid drummer all around. Now, again, this started off as kind of a side project. They put out their first full length in 2010. It was an okay album, and I guess the stars aligned for another one 10 years down the road, and this time they got to tap Dan Seagrave to do a really, really sick album cover. That thing is incredible. So this album opens up with Soul Excavation, and right away I can pretty much tell one of the main influences I would have to say is on this, namely Obituary. The vocals in particular, especially when Gru does his higher screams, sound a lot like John Tardy. Like even down to that, like that over-the-top dramatic delivery. He does a fair amount of that. And musically, it's pretty similar too. Like it follows a lot of like kind of mid-tempo, like real chuggy songs. Now this also breaks into some faster, thrashier gallops too. Very similar to Benediction. And that's pretty much like the core of their sound. It's very meat and potatoes death metal, some death doomy moments kind of pockmarked here and there, and just lots of very 90s death metal. Namely, it still sounds a little bit more Floridian. Like it doesn't really scream like European death metal very much. Now, going back and listening to Morgoth albums, they definitely had a love affair with death. There was a lot of bands that had a love affair with death, and I don't blame them. Death were absolutely incredible. This still sounds very much like that, but this has a lot of that Obituary type groove. Like even when it kind of breaks into the faster D-beat sections, it really has just that distinct feel of early Obituary albums, namely those first three. The song Betrayer, the main riff on it sounds like that ending part to Slowly We Rot, you know, entirely. Like it really has that feel overall. Pretty solid, fun song. Now, the thing is, like, throughout the course of this album, a lot of this meat and potatoes aspect is solid, but I think towards the end they get a little bit more adventurous. Invisible War, which I believe they shot a really creepy video for, I think they were in like a sewer tunnel or a rain drainage thing. I don't know, there was a creepy girl in it. It was weird. But this song actually kind of has like a cool feedback buildup, and this one actually features a co-vocalist on it, Jorgen Sandstrom. Probably butchering your name, and I'm sorry. This guy has played in a litany of bands. I believe he's currently in some other bands that I forget at the moment, but I know he was the bassist for both Grave and Entombed at one point, so it's pretty good cred. And he brings in some much deeper vocals to sort of contrast Gru's more Tardy-esque delivery, which, again, that's all over the place on here, and I absolutely love that. I like the fact that the vocal trade-offs are there, but when it comes down to the chorus part, they kind of layer that growl to sort of create something different, because they definitely have two very distinct growls. And this one gets maybe a little bit more technical. You start hearing some more technical flourishes here and there versus the more kind of dry, straightforward approach that you hear early on in the album. This is kind of the moment where I think the album picks up a bit. Because before, it was good, but it felt like this was stuff I could just kind of return to those early Obituary albums or maybe jam a Jungle Rot album and kind of get the same effect. Born into Bondage, another favorite of mine on here, this one really labors the Death Doom aspect. In fact, the opening melody sounds like it's taken straight from a Paradise Lost album. Like it really has all the doom and gloom before building into like a nice thrashy gallop. It's a really high energy song. But the thing that really stood out on this song and started to kind of pop up a little bit more on the album was there's a little bit more atmosphere. The lead melodies come in, they're very dissonant, they're very haunting, they definitely build an atmosphere, and there's some cool like vocal passages towards the end that sound very tortured and anguished, and it really adds a lot to the song. And again, when you compare it to some of the earlier songs, this one just feels like they tried a little bit harder to create like an atmosphere, give you like the overall feel, like match up those big sludgy riffs with something that feels haunted and grimy and dirty, and it really, really works on this one. Now, when it comes down to the faster moments on here, it's mostly like a thrashy gallop or a D beat, up until you get to an end date with the world, which is kind of an interesting wording there. This song goes full-bore blast beats, and it definitely reminded me of their drummer actually played in bands like Malevolent Creation and Nile, because it is full tilt. It is honestly one of the most different songs on here just because of its speed and aggression. There are other songs where there's some like pockmarked blast beats here and there, but this one is pretty much blast beats up front. That's one of the main things to it. And to further change it up, the vocal delivery is a bit different. It's a little bit more of like a thrashy bark. Now there's still parts where it's very atmospheric and he sort of brings out the tardy-ish scream, which I think that should be the appropriate term for that style. This is easily the most aggressive song on here, I would say. But I like the fact that it's still very atmospheric, and this is just sort of an interesting pacing issue with the album. Like the front half seems very cut and dry, and honestly, by track 4, I figured I knew what I was gonna get. And then towards the middle / back half, that's where some of the more inventive tracks came out. I think the ones that were just a little bit more creative, they kind of jumped outside of the formula. And that is the main wheelhouse on this album. They are fiercely old school, very early 90s death metal. They even brought in Cam Lee from Massacre on here to contribute some more deep vocals. And it just kind of sticks to that moment, but when it comes down to the stuff they kind of jump outside of it, I thought that was more interesting. Like when they're doing Death Doom breaks. There's one that begins the song Secret Sorcery that I think is easily the doomiest moment on here. Now, of course, it doesn't hang out very long, breaks into like some thrashy spots and actually kind of like some thrashy blasts, like that really fast thrash beat you would hear on a Pestilence album. But it does return to those doom-laden moments. One thing I really took away from this band is it's kind of similar to a band like Gruesome, except Gruesome is very transparent about what they're doing. They are a death tribute act, essentially. They even openly admit that, oh yeah, we kind of reworked some death songs and made them our own, but we fully acknowledge that this is Death's music. This is pretty much what we're doing, is trying to sound as much like Death as possible. This feels kind of the same, at least for most of the album, where it feels like it's kind of a obituary tribute, because there is so much on here that reminds me specifically of those first 3 Obituary albums that it kind of would fit like that. The only real difference being I don't think they're like transparent about it, but I would have to say that influence is 100% there. But overall, this is a fun listen. I really enjoyed it. It's straightforward 90s death metal. This is the stuff I grew up with, except, you know, it's a newer band doing it now. So overall, I'm going to give it 3 stars. There really isn't much here I haven't heard before, but it's executed really well. I kind of wish the front half of the album was as exciting as the back half of the album. I feel like I had to wait a while for this album to really like open up and actually show off some stuff. The first half felt very cut and dry. Granted, good, but when it got to the back half, I think we started seeing a little bit more of what this band was capable of. And what they were capable of was pretty solid. So yeah, definitely one worth checking out. Definitely pick it up, download it, whatever your preferred medium, but definitely jam it. So if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up. If you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We will catch you later.